and welcome back to my channel, which is dedicated to philosophy, music, arts and culture in general. So, let's talk about antiquity and Aristotle his work, which is called Poetics or On the Art of Poetry. And it was created around 335 before Christianity, and maybe let's remember the structure and the content just a little. So, treatise consists of 26 paragraphs or little chapters. Well, my opinion is it's just paragraphs. And the purpose of Poetics for Aristotle and its aim, its task, its aim. And poetic creativity is imitation. For Aristotle, it's so. And the difference between the types of poetry depending on the ways of imitations. And of course, we can create by sounds, by colors, by gests, by words, and so on and so forth. But the essence is to create, and to create for Aristotle means to imitate. So-called mimesis. I don't know exactly how it should be pronounced in English. Mimesis. So, the difference between the types of poetry depending on the subjects of imitations, and of course people are differ, and the characters in art are also different. And for example, Aristotle says that Homer portrayed his personage as the best of the human beings. They are better than we in general, yeah. And Cleophon as something similar, something equal as the human being in reality. And we can mention, for example, something more appropriate for us, for example, William Shakespeare. And in my opinion, Shakespeare sharpened the features of his characters, of his personages, to create something more expressive in his way. So, the difference between the types of poetry depending on the methods of imitation, and we can mention an objective story and its epic poetry, a personal performance of the narrator, and it can be called lyrics, and an image of events in action, drama or tragedy. And the question of the place of origin of tragedy and comedy, well, Tragos is connected with songs in Dionysus' circle, yeah. And comedy. The Dorians drove out the poets and they wandered through the so-called comas or villages around the polis, and so they wandered there, and so they were called comics. The natural foundations of poetry, the initial division of poetry into epic and satirical, and further it was divided into tragedy and comedy. And the basics for poetry are that people are prone to imitate prone to imitation. They learn this way through imitation. And imitation brings pleasure, to tell the truth. And here we can see the critics directed to Plato's ideas about art, and Plato's critics argues about art. So Homer, for example, was also the greatest poet in the serious field for Aristotle, and because he was the only one who not created beautiful poems but also gave dramatic images. So he was a master of these dramatic images. And in comedy he was the first to indicate its forms, presenting in action not the shameful but the ridiculous, and this is the crucial point for Aristotle. Definition of comedy and its development. The difference between an epic and a tragedy is in their volume and in their language, method of instrument of language. Comedy is an image of the depravity of people in a funny way. And the funny is a particle ugly, but it's just that we are not so afraid of this ugliness in a funny way. The tragedy is should be played within the circle of the sun, and it's a very important thesis for Aristotle, and after Aristotle, very important thesis for the classicism, as you know. So, definition of tragedy, and this part about tragedy is the biggest, the largest in these treatises, because the part of comedy was lost. So a tragic should be defined as the catharsis. Catharsis is something like cleansing, and the comparative significance of the action and the plot in the tragedy should be. So tragedy is a serious and complete action, and this completion is a very significant, crucial point. And the decoration of the tragedy are rhythm, harmony, and matter. The plot is the development of events, the reproduction of them, and not just the description of characters of people. So the characters are also important because through them the action is performed, and then the text should be done very appropriate and very accurate, of course. And the concept of the integrity and complementness of the action in the tragedy. The duration of the action in the tragedy should be, as I had also said, should be done in the one circle of the sun, and it's and the author should achieve the unity of the time of the plot and unity of this duration, maybe. And the integrity of the action is important. That is the beginning of all. And development and the end should be done also very correctly and very accurate. So the poet's task, the poet's aim is the author must create a harmonious plot from the myths, but historical inaccuracy is allowed for the sake of the plot. And the amazing thing is the randomness of the events for its purpose. It depends on their purpose. The action can be simple or confusing, and both are possible if it's necessary. Elements of an intricate action, and the author should include twists and turns and recognitions. For example, Aristotle, who recognizes Iphigenia, and it's very impressive moment of the tragedy, for example. External division of the tragedy into parts, and this division should be also done very correctly. Actions that cause compassion and fear should be included into the tragedy, and the transition from happiness to suffering of good people is not scary and not a pity, but outrageous. So, two vicious personages are not worth it because it serves them, right? And the personage should be something in the middle, not too vicious and not too high or not too noble, not too heroic, not too excellent, good in their moral features and characters. And for Aristotle, Euripides is the most tragic poet because of his achievement of these obstacles. Characters of the heroes or personages in the tragedy. Of course, they need something for their idealization. Nobility, conformity, plausibility, consistency, and there should be a logical structure of development. But Aristotle emphasizes that if the exception is needed, it can be done. For example, Menelaus is a low hero, but he is needed for Clytemnestra and for the plot. So, tips for poets, how to write tragedies. We need to clearly imagine, and we need experience for ourselves that the poet depicts, and feeling the poet should, and the reader or the artist should feel something very clearly what he is or she is talking about now in the moment. Important subject for good tragedy. Aristotle emphasizes that we should include common words, glosses, metaphors, and decorations of speech to decorate our tragedy. And common usage is understandable to everyone. It's a general meaning. And glosses are something that understandable to few people. Yeah? And metaphor, the transfer of a word with a changed meaning, for example, by analogy. We can say 10 of thousands, and we can say many or a lot of, and so on and so forth. So the advantages of poetic speech. Poetic speech syllable should be clear and not low. So the conditions for achieving these qualities: moderate use of usual language, general language, and metaphors and glosses and modified words, and transition to epic poetry. And Aristotle again emphasizes the superiority of Homer over other epic poets, and the image is not of a story but of a time with events, and that's a general meaning for epic as a genre. The similarity between the epic and the tragedy, and the difference between an epic and the tragedy. The matter in the epic poetry is more peculiar, and the merits of Homer for Aristotle is in the field of the epic, because Homer is the teacher of expedient deception, poetic illusion. And just as in tragedy, compositions, thirds, text, events, and languages are also important in the epic and in the tragedy also, but special heroic matter, so-called hexameter, is needed because it's a majesty. So, critical attacks on poets and ways to refute them. We can mention the beginning of this treatise, and we should say that imitation is the way of learning and the way of enjoying for person. And for poetry, the impossible but probable is preferable to the possible but improbable for Aristotle. And the sample, the personality in tragedy should stand higher than reality. So that treatise has not reached us completely, as you know. Only the first part, and the second part was devoted to the analysis of the comedy, and presumably we can judge about its content from the so-called treatise of Koalenov. It's Koalen. It's anonymous Greek manuscript, possibly which was written by Aristotle's student Theophrastus. Also, the mystery of Aristotle and Poetics is devoted to the novel by Umberto Eco, The Name of the Rose. And these treatises had a great influence on the era of classicism, especially on Boileau and the development of comedies and tragedies of Corneille, Racine, Molière, and so on and so forth. So thank you for your attention, and see you next time. Thank you.